I think one of the mistakes people do is try to sell all of that in one go. You can adapt on it. You can make little kind of things and just keep going there and just iterate there.
Machine learning is the technique that's been successful in driving forwards this new kind of age of better recommendations, machine vision, uh, 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 image recognition, these large language text models. Machine learning is the technique that underlies a lot of what's happening kind of in the background that's driving the leaps that we're seeing.
Hello and welcome to Mobile App Daily interview series. Joining me today is Remy Brooks and Greet Jans. Remy, you are the joint managing director at Future Platforms, co-founder at What's Next, a Beamer 100 judge, and Greet, you are the joint managing director at Future Platforms, designer and founding member of Chief, a private network for women in leadership. Thank you, Remy and Greet, for joining me today. And before we get on to any of my questions, could you briefly introduce yourself to our audience, specifically in terms of your professional trajectory and how that has sort of been in perhaps the closest timeline?
No problem. I'm happy to go first. Hello, I'm Remy Brooks. I guess my background is kind of a mix of startups and agencies. So I've kind of worked in digital for a long time. That started with kind of working in when mobile was brand new, when big data was brand new, when these things were kind of just emerging. And a lot of my career was in helping companies all over the world to understand what that meant for their businesses. So training them on how to get the best out of SEO, how to think about social media as it was emerging, how to deliver better results using digital, essentially. A couple of those companies got acquired as my career grew and moved into the kind of world of agencies and digital product. So heavily focused on kind of creating digital products and services, whether they're web or app or wearables or for TVs, that customers really love to engage with, but also kind of deliver genuine results back to businesses all over the world. Done that in a mix of agencies and now kind of landed as joint managing director at Future Platforms with Greet.
Cool. So I'm Greet Jans, known as Greet, so you can call me Greet. Bit similar, but not completely. I've always done a design role. I studied industrial design, product design originally. Directly went into design, like joined a design company and moved there into digital, and that's how everything just kick-started. That was in Belgium at the time. I moved then to an advertising agency that was quite quirky and looking at how to do experience design research design from an advertising point of view, before working for a smaller company that really, like at that point, communities were big. So we were setting up digital communities in a offline world and got acquired by a company like that and trying to make them digital. And then I moved to London, worked for the Publicis group, like Publicis Sapient and Digitas in various markets and in various roles. What was designed before I joined Future Platforms.
You dabble into web development, app development. There's also, you have the background in big data, and you've essentially been at the forefront of, let's say, digital development, specifically. I would say the, if not back end, but like the forefront of digital development, excluding, let's say, design, right? Like the bigger chunk of it. Now, within that, with that in keeping that in context, at Future Platform, what is some, like, perhaps it could be a technology or perhaps certain sectors that excite you the most, or something that's ongoing which is really exciting for you at the moment?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. So I guess the things that I find exciting at the moment, actually, I think the way I'll tackle that, there's kind of like, I'll start with the obvious. So for me, what's gone on in kind of AI and machine learning over the last probably 18 months is genuinely kind of mind blowing. My prediction will be, it's almost the kind of next epoch of technology, like on the same kind of level as, I don't know, if the internet coming out was the first kind of massive change in the world, then kind of Web 2.0, so in terms of kind of social media and being able to interact over the internet, was the next big leap. Mobile was kind of the really next massive leap after that, and I don't think we'll ever see anything as impactful in the world digitally as that. But I think AI is the next one of those massive leaps. I think it already is infused in most of the products and services everybody uses every single day. So just the things that feel, and it's kind of comes back to the conversation we've had earlier, but the things that feel really simple as experiences, i.e., here's a photo that we're going to recommend for you, or Google Photos putting a collage together of kind of a trip that you went on. Almost all those experiences, even something as simple as like the predictions when you're texting on your phone and the recommendations of words, all of that is driven by machine learning and AI. But the leap so people are already experiencing it every single day now, millions and millions and billions of interactions, just it's kind of embedded in your day to day. But the leap that's happened in the last year, where things like chat GPT, stable diffusion, where both the kind of image-driven AI, where you can write these prompts and it generates kind of essentially any image you ask it to chat GPT, where you can essentially throw almost any question at it and it comes back with a response which feels like almost human. Those leaps which have been made and are going to continue, I think, to be made over the next 5 years, I think are going to make a real kind of change in the world. I think computers and digital is going to become much more useful, much closer to being able to answer the really tricky questions, which you had to do a lot of hard work to get answers for in the past. So really simple, like kind of example is, how many of us have gone onto Google, typed in a search query, and had to dig through about 6 different links, had to reword your query to go back again to find another link. You end up with 38 tabs open on your machine and it starts slowing down and the fans turn on. I think AI is going to genuinely change that to you put in these queries and actually you're getting responses back which are filling in those gaps, pulling in things for where you had to go and find those 10, 15 sources. They're pulling them together on your behalf and for you. So that's kind of the one I think is obvious, but massively impactful.
You mentioned AI and machine learning in the same sentence, and
Mm-hmm.
I recently just had a conversation with another expert in this field, and one of the things they pointed out, which I kind of agree with, which is that these terms AI, machine learning,
Mm-hmm.
and well, yeah, mostly these two have been interchangeably used like ever since the term sort of popped up, and with
Mm-hmm.
no real context. Nobody actually knows like what's the difference between them, or in what
Mm-hmm.
directions do these both go in and then come together. So
Mm-hmm.
if you I wanted to know from you, how do you define these two terms, and if there is
Mm-hmm.
another term which you think is more interchangeably used with these two, and what
Mm-hmm.
is the essential difference between them?
Cool. Really good question. So my first point, I guess, would be the language that we use, as long as people understand the underlying of kind of what do you mean, like I'm actually quite happy for us to keep using that language loosely and interchangeably, because I think that's the human thing to do. As soon as we get caught up in actually that's not exactly what it means, I feel like we're kind of losing the essence of just we're human beings. This is how language works. But if you're thinking about that kind of definition, machine learning is the technique that's been successful in driving forwards this new kind of age of better recommendations, machine vision, uh, 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 image recognition, these large language text models. Machine learning is the technique that underlies a lot of what's happening kind of in the background that's driving the leaps that we're seeing. AI, interestingly, is kind of people have in their mind a kind of picture of robots that are kind of feel really human, that are talking back to you, and you can't really tell, is it a human or is it a robot? But I think I read a definition the other day of, which I kind of agreed with, which was AI is anything which feels like magic at the time. So probably, I don't know, 100 years ago, being able to print out words into a book probably could have been defined as AI at the time. When we were, I think like 30, 40, 50 years ago, when there were kind of programs that were able to play chess successfully, that was AI at the time. Every time we get to a new leap, we call it AI until there's kind of a term which is kind of general AI, which is AI that can essentially take any task, understand it, and be able to kind of adapt to it. So you could literally throw anything at it, which is that's the science fiction version of AI. But I'm actually quite comfortable with, let's call AI anything which feels really magical at the time, and keep adapting and keep improving our understanding of it. I'm quite comfortable with that.
When it comes to AI,
Mm-hmm.
I because like you said, that general AI is essentially, anything that's new, that's beyond sort of public understanding at the moment and has to do with tech. It just gets labeled
Mm-hmm.
as AI, artificial intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as of now, it's some bits of it have been fairly established. Like, let's say conversational AI, that's been something that's there's been a lot of talk about it, and then there's machine learning, which is essentially, I would say, if correct me if I'm wrong, but like essentially the infrastructure, or to
Mm-hmm.
recap what I just essentially the skeleton of these magical technologies, like the actual organs.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, and machine learning, as per my
Mm-hmm.
understanding, is based, is based on data.
Yep.
And there is that's why I think big data was probably the third term which I was forgetting
Mm-hmm.
earlier, where I said that big data, AI, and machine learning,
Mm-hmm.
all three of them are kind of jumbled together. So
Mm-hmm.
now you've cleared the doubts for AI and machine learning, but I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
know, where exactly does big data fit into this picture? What is big data, and how
Mm-hmm.
does it how is that involved in this process?
Cool. So a lot of these, if AI is the outcome, like you've got a thing that feels magical, machine learning is the technique of how do you get to that magical thing. Big data is the input. So big data is what is fed into the machine learning technique, which creates the magical output at the end. If you think of things like OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, um, that has been trained on for its language models, basically the entire internet. Which, if you think about the size of that, um, the really interesting thing when you read some of the papers about how these things come together is uh, originally there was a kind of, with a lot of the PhDs who have been working on this for years and years and years in places like MIT, there was a original thought that humans need to be involved in tweaking the algorithms through machine learning to make sure that the outputs that we get are closer and closer to what's kind of understandable to us. So the output feels useful and we can understand it and it makes sense. Actually, what they found, and where a lot of the breakthroughs have happened, is you just need to feed more data into it. Take the humans out of it. The less we're involved, the better the models actually get. So chucking the entirety of the internet at the model, the internet is essentially the biggest library of human data that's ever existed and possibly ever will exist. Throwing the whole thing into a machine language model is actually what makes it effective. So like, that's kind of the underlying reason that we're seeing these massive leaps forward. The interesting thing now is, now that we've got some of these machine learning models that have done the massive scale work to create these new experiences, what you're seeing is people are taking those models and tweaking them on much smaller data. So people are, to give one real example, Stable Diffusion, which is one of the open source kind of AI, people have taken, and it's one of the image-based ones. So essentially you put in a prompt, it creates an image. People have taken that and really tweaked it in a kind of specialist way. So there's a bunch of services now. One's called Lensa, one's called Avatar.ai, for example. There's another one which is based on rooms, but they've taken those massive models which work as general kind of, will create any image you ask for, and they've turned them into specialist models by using a much smaller data set. So the Avatar.ai or Lensa, for example, is just about creating digital avatars. So you feed it with pictures of yourself. So I take about 5-10 selfies, feed that into their service, which is built on top of Stable Diffusion's model. And it's trying to do is create avatars of me in various different guises. So me as an archer, me as an ogre, me as a anime character. It just has been trained on a much smaller data set to do a really specialist job, or training it on literal rooms like the room I'm sitting in. So there's other services which are now being used for when buildings are built. Often they have to do a bunch of 3D CAD modeling after a building's been built, so that they can upload pictures to kind of property websites of we've got an empty shell, but we want to put some sofas in it and some mirrors in it and some art on the wall and some plants. There's AI now which can take an empty shell and fill it with a bunch of kind of household goods that feels and looks real, but hasn't had someone have to kind of spend hours and hours actually kind of crafting it by hand. So training the kind of big data is how those models are created. We're starting to move into a world where small kind of specialist data sets are helping us create products and services on top of those much smaller models.
When it comes to design in 2023 as of now, what would you say are the most innovative technologies, or perhaps experimental strategies, design strategies that maybe you can think of at the top of your mind?
Tools and experiments wise, I think tools wise, actually the fact that a lot of designers start using a lot of tools that are actually not meant for design. So if you say, for example, the fact of GitHub things or developer kind of tools that we start plugging in and playing with in design, because as mentioned before, probably there hasn't been an over focus on design kind of things, except for those tools that Remy has said, where there's, for example, image generation and something comes out of it. I think it is the moment repurposing things that are already out there and playing with what they can do on your design that at the moment are the things we use most. Then trend-wise, it's going a bit everywhere, if I'm honest. Like, I was again this morning looking at the CES kind of trends and those kind of things. It is in a way different than last year, and yet a big evolution on what was last year already at South by and all this kind of things. It hasn't evolved as much on that front. Whether that is because of the situation we're in globally, or whether that is because everybody is experimenting with it and taking it further and seeing what sticks and what doesn't stick. I don't really know, but we're in this particular thing that it is very much still of an evolution, and that, like what Remy already has said, trends-wise, that's likely going to happen. No, we're not all going to go and jump into the metaverse and those kind of things. It's still where this year has not been that new, but in a way I find that interesting, because often there is these are the 2-3 new trends. This is the new, like in the design world, the new Pantone color that which is magenta for those who want to know it. But like in the new trend color of the year, like in things like that. I'm quite happy it isn't going as wild. There's more of a focus still on sustainability, doing good, being kind to each other, like in having the empathy whilst doing the great thing. And maybe that doesn't sound sexy, but it is actually showing that we probably got the right balance while still pushing the craft further and the technology further and those kind of things.
When you were talking about how basically user behavior, the picture that was coming into my head is how the data sets for user behavior is getting so sort of there's a fission for it, and it's getting disrupted and split into such smaller pieces that it's almost become micro user data. Like there's no, like you said, that you can't actually predict anymore how a certain behavior will continue to exist. Everybody keeps changing their mind. So I was wondering that with such micro segments of user behavior sort of becoming the norm, how is that, has that translated in any way in your design language? Because as I talked to Remy, post pandemic, your clients had to adjust to this, split of user, like that big gamut of user behavior that was taken for granted into these micro sections. And I'm wondering, because in design, it's essentially like making the user feel most comfortable using a certain product, right? And so the design language, I assume, would also have to adapt with this breakdown of a broader user behavior into micro segments. So has that?
It has, but it is very much linked to things that you already see. I personally have never been a big fan of personas, but we use a lot more archetypes, and we're going way more in the jobs to be done, but we tweak those things then so they work for us. So you take the basis of something that already works, jobs to be done, what do you want to achieve? We look a lot more on top of that and how do we want people to feel then, and add that emotion to that particular functional kind of thing. And I think that is one of the, whether it's unique or not, I don't really know, but whether one of those things that we actively do to do it, because even though you could say it's harder to develop for people because we're all more different, I think in a way it's easier, because you can say, for example, these are particular things that you have in common, but you probably bridge a bit in particular other things. Yeah. Don't know if that makes sense, but not everything needs to adapt. That would be complete. There's been a world where people then thought everything needs to adapt, and all these, I even remember that a few years ago we were in a pitch, and in all different component blocks, and everything was changing and trying to sell that, and then this complexity, that's not the answer to it. You have little touches to it where it is you were hearing the journey before, we recognize that this is why we recommend this particular thing. But if you go, for example, to Virgin Active, it might be based on things that you've told me, you told that you want to get fit and you work out twice a week, and you're interested in going to classes, and you're interested in yoga, versus you are a heavy gym goer, and I can give you a completely different profile of you're the exact opposite profile, and therefore the components and the structure kind of thing is there, but some of the content within it changes that it is right for you. But structurally, that page still works. Or it might be, you've told us over and over again, you're not interested in collecting points. So after a while, we just might hide that feature. And even though the rest of the app is completely the same, or the rest of the product is completely the same, it feels right for you. But then you can take it a step further, to which I give, and then say, for example, but if you recognize that a female interested in yoga and in Pilates, while like in Remy in this case, male interested in those kind of things. If you can then adapt some of the imagery and you do that with all the other kind of things, and your language is right, you have achieved what you need to achieve. And you can also sell that in steps. You don't have to directly. I think one of the mistakes people do is try to sell all of that in one go. You can adapt on it. You can make little kind of things and just keep going there and just iterate there.
The puzzle is a good imagery for that, because I feel like what you said about focusing on similarities. If you're trying to solve a puzzle, if you focus on how the pieces are different, you're never going to actually solve the puzzle. And finally, on a final note, keeping all of our conversation in context, because you mentioned AI, you mentioned trends in design, and everything that's been happening over the last year. I was just wondering what's on the horizon for you personally, as well as for the company in 2023.
Cool, I can take that. So in 2023, kind of since me and Greet have kind of taken over as joint MDs, I think one of the things we're excited about and kind of trying to move forward is a real focus on craft. So making sure that the the the, the products and the services that we work on feel a little bit special, feel like they're really made for and really fit the brands and the clients that we're working for. They feel properly bespoke. I think like a trend and the pattern that's been kind of happening through this conversation in particular is like it's really easy for best practice to be just applied really easily across brands. It doesn't really matter who, and everyone end up feeling quite homogenous, quite samey. Like the difference between brands and experiences starts to all kind of feel like it could have been from anyone. If everyone's using the same patterns, how do you start to feel different? So the thing that we're quite focused on for the next kind of year is how do we find in the right moments, of course, like those the moments where it really matters, how do we make those experiences genuinely differentiated, genuinely fit the brands and the personality of the brands that we're working with, but also like kind of are infused with the personalities of the people that have created them, and how do we bring that all together in things that feel genuinely kind of unique and a bit special.
So in
and on top of that, I think there's a big request for speed from all of our clients and from our teams. While of course we're fairly bespoke, which is an interesting dynamic, and like we've over the last year changed our tools, changed our processes, changed all of that kind of thing to reflect that, because else like you almost make yourself irrelevant without losing the core of what it is that we add at being bespoke. And I think that's an interesting thing. Plus also the fact of, I think the combo of us, like in hopefully helps then the people who work with us to deliver it, and that's both on client side as people who deliver it, like in like that particular mindset of like curiosity, but like in the fun, the excitement, and those kind of things, to really over focus on those things, whilst finding the niche of where some people force particular things of come back in those kind of things. The uber flexibility that we offers hopefully like it gives a bit of a counter to that. That on a personal level, as you mentioned in the beginning, joining Chief hopefully helps a little bit. Again, I think both of us play a role in, and me as I like in the clear, visual, obvious kind of thing. Me as a woman, Remy representing like members of the Black community kind of thing. I think we will obviously within the sense where it's comfortable for us kind of thing, but keep playing a key role there, because that is just important. And I can also speak for myself, but like in having mentors in those kind of things, now getting a bit of a network myself again around me and seeing what that means. Like that's just exciting as well.
Yeah. No, it's a pity that I wasn't able to tap into it. Like I really wanted to also talk about that, because you, as you mentioned, that both of you in some ways do represent the underdogs. And especially in tech, where it's kind of just all dominated by men, for me, like white men for major chunk. But hopefully that we'll cover from some other time. I really hope we can have another conversation, perhaps next year, when you launch some exciting products in AI. And on that note, thank you so much, Remy Brooks and Greet Jans, for having me in this conversation today. And I wish you all the very best.
You too. Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Yeah.